Oh no,
they're going to crash! And they have!
But is this guy blind? What the is wrong with him?
Oh, that is ridiculous.
That is a huge hit into the back.
Lance Stroll, the money boy of Formula One, is probably someone you don't like, but do you even know why? Lance is not a bad driver by any stretch of the imagination, definitely doing better than Nikita Mazepin. Stroll has been on pole.
Stroll crosses the line, and he does go pole. 1:47.7. Lawrence Stroll is on pole for the first time in his career.
Interrupted the Monaco GP.
Crash on the inside towards the Della Rogiel. What has happened? We need to know who's going to come out in front as we see Lance Stroll hitting the barrier and going over the curb.
Even made it on the podium. That's far more than many other drivers have done.
As for words right now, it was a hectic race. That was probably one of the closest finishes of all time.
With 2025 on the horizon, there's a glimmer of hope. A legend jumping ship with enough power to force the hand of Lawrence Stroll. Let's call it the Newey Ultimatum. But first, Lance Stroll had no easy path to F1. Okay, that's a bit of a lie. Let's restart this. Lance Stroll was born into wealth. His father, Lawrence Stroll, is a billionaire businessman, and despite what everyone tells you, his money helped Lance to get a seat in F1. Lawrence has always been a big fan of the sport, and well, his son, Lance, was not that bad, and certainly had a prospective chance to one day be an F1 driver. The young Canadian, who hails from Montreal, began his career karting at the age of 10. A bit older than guys like Max and Charles, but age is just a number, right? Well, Lance didn't disappoint and won numerous regional and national titles, probably because the karting in Canada is so competitive. In fact, Canada has produced a long history of just one F1 champion, Jacques Villeneuve, in 1997, under somewhat controversial circumstances.
The first Canadian to be crowned Formula One World Champion. He finished third in the European Grand Prix after championship rival Michael Schumacher span out following a collision with Villeneuve 20 laps from the end.
Nevertheless, Canada produced another great driver, Gilles Villeneuve. But wait, aren't those two family? Well, Jacques is the son of Gilles, so perhaps Lance is part of the family. Well, unfortunately, no. But Canada has produced quite a few drivers like Nicholas Latifi, Alan Berg, Peter Ryan, and more recently Lance Stroll, just to name a few. But what do they all have in common? Well, they never accomplished anything worth noting. Nevertheless, this is not a dig at Canada. It just doesn't seem like the country can produce consistently good drivers like Germany, Britain, and even recently the Netherlands. But we marshal on. Lance eventually earned himself a spot in the Ferrari Driver Academy at the age of 11, which certainly helped him with recognition while Daddy was covering the racing bills. By 2014, Lance had spent nearly 5 years in junior formulae, culminating with his victory in the Italian F4 Championship with Prima Racing.
Flag, and that's going to be a wonderful moment in this young man's career. Lance Stroll crosses the line and wins the New Zealand Grand Prix and the championship on the same day.
Lance was looking good, and in the following 2 years he won the Toyota Racing Series, and by 2016 he even dominated the FIA Formula 3 European Championship. Williams, noting this success, thought it good to have him skip F2 entirely, and he was given a seat next to Felipe Massa at Williams. Just 18 years old, Williams truly believed he could be the next Max Verstappen. Lance was thrust into a strong team, even scoring his first F1 podium that same year. The next year, well, he could only manage 8th as his highest position, and rumours began swirling of Williams looking to move on from the Canadian. Not to worry for the youngster, as his father, also an avid F1 fan with a lot of money lying around, decided that he wanted to buy an F1 team. Daddy Stroll acquired the Force India team, rebranding them to Racing Point in 2019. This time, he would be paired with Sergio Perez, an actually great driver. But Stroll continued onward, earning a few points here and a few there. He racked up another 2 podiums between Racing Point and Aston, even earning his first pole at the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix. Well, Lewis won after Stroll was flying like a bird without wings to 9th when the checkered flag was waving. Still, no one batted an eye, and with his calm, silent demeanour, fans didn't care much for Stroll occupying an everlasting seat. Then 2021 happened, and a German former champion Sebastian Vettel joined the green Aston Martin outfit.
Vettel, the 19-year-old making his debut, and he's 7th on the grid. Great effort from him.
Vettel would outdrive Stroll race after race, despite the car lacking any sort of performance. But fans would attribute this to the car's performance, and when Seb finally called it a day, the next guy who would supposedly help Stroll was another champion, Fernando Alonso. While the 2023 season started off well for the British-based team, Alonso was consistently fighting at the head of the race, even racking up a few podiums. Meanwhile, Stroll in the same car was consistently lagging. It was a repeat of his days at Williams, with Massa needing a lot of physio for carrying the team on his back as much. Fans began turning on Lance Stroll. Don't get us wrong, Lance is not the worst driver by any means. If you remember guys like Nikita Mazepin, Nicholas Latifi and Heikki Kovalainen, Stroll actually seems like Senna, but what frustrates fans is the fact that he's simply not good enough for F1. Perhaps he'd shine in IndyCar, but on a Formula 1 grid, there are only 20 seats available. Historically, these seats were reserved for the best drivers in the world. These drivers like Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell and Jean Alesi, to name a few, had to earn their way into top teams. If they didn't perform, they moved on or were dropped. In fact, it's still the norm nowadays. Just look at how Red Bull has ruined the careers of many drivers by only giving them half a season and dropping them. But it has kept the grid competitive and means that every driver is trying to prove a point. Why should Lance have this same drive when Daddy owns the team? This has silently begun eating at F1 fans, noticing a young former F2 champion in the wake of making his F1 debut. This young man is none other than Felipe Drugovich, who actually earned his way into F1 by winning the F2 World Championship in 2022. How was he repaid? Well, Aston signed him as a reserve driver.
Puts his foot flat to the floor and takes 4th place. Felipe Drugovich of Brazil comes across the line to win for the 4th time in Formula 2.
Now, many might argue that Stroll is still young. Perhaps Aston should get rid of Alonso. But despite Fernando now being a wily old fox, he is still performing at peak level. Secondly, Alonso would make a great tutor for Drugovich, something he has actively been trying to do for Stroll. But the Canadian simply doesn't seem to be absorbing anything. Stroll is eating up a seat on the grid, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Without funding from Lawrence Stroll, Aston Martin F1 might cease to exist, which means that everyone in the Aston factory is dependent on the happiness of Lawrence and Lance Stroll. This is quite a pickle, and also partly responsible for the fact that no one seems to be working very hard to create a competitive car for the team. In fact, no one truly even knows the extent of Lance's contract. He could be signed for a year, or perhaps a lifelong contract. Who knows? But what is clear is that fans are beginning to voice their frustration at this setup. But there is a glimmer of hope. Any hardcore F1 fan knows the name Adrian Newey. The British engineer, aerodynamicist and motorsport executive has been in the paddock for a long time. He's done it all in F1, winning numerous constructors' titles and often being labelled as the best ground effect engineer F1 has ever seen. A few drivers who have driven his cars include Max Verstappen, Mika Hakkinen, Sebastian Vettel and even the legendary Ayrton Senna. This gives you power and recognition in the paddock. While no one can truly confirm this, many believe that Newey has judged Stroll to be not good enough to be an F1 driver. While no one might be willing to step on the toes of bossman Stroll, Newey simply doesn't care. He might have had a few words for the old Alonso as well, but Fernando is heading towards 50. But if there is any way someone could convince Lawrence to get rid of his son, it might just be the legendary Adrian Newey. In fact, we might even see Newey convince Verstappen to eventually make the switch. However, the chances of this are highly unlikely, given the Dutchman's current contract. But for the foreseeable future, Lance will remain a frequent fixture on the grid. You might not like him, but every F1 fan will have to deal with the fact that Lance will just be a thorn in the side of frontrunners and occasionally wreck his car when Master Alonso gives him advice. Lance Stroll is the ultimate F1 rich kid. But while you might judge Lance, the Canadian actually has a long list of accomplishments. Yes, frustrating other drivers is at the top of his list, but Lance has won many competitions. Nowadays, he's an unpopular driver on the grid, and according to fans, he signifies how F1 has become a billionaire boys club. But is Lance Stroll really that bad? And is his dad the only reason he's still in the sport?